Now, we've got amazing thought leaders today, and it's so powerful to have them with us. But so often we want to hear about, hey, hold on a second, how did you get to where you are in your career? And so we're really thrilled to be able to bring to you, in many cases, the most powerful time of the day is our executive panel. And here today on our executive panel working with us is Shelley the Vice President of Product Management at Ceridian, Vanessa Iarocci, the Associate Vice President at TD Wealth, Cheryl Stargratt, from the Chief People Officer at Tangerine, and Rebecca Mooney, the Vice President, Head of Brand Marketing at RBC Wealth Management. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Ladies. And welcome to the gymnastics portion of our show. It's not a 4-inch balance beam, but it is a challenge to get into these stools, and so they will do it brilliantly. The mount is important. The dismount is even more important, so we'll take a look at that. And so welcome, ladies. I'm so glad that you could be with me here again today. We've had a chance to chat a little bit before we got to the event, but maybe if I could start with you, Rebecca, at the far end, and share with us a little bit about your company and yourself. Why are you here?
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. It's been a brilliant morning so far, so we'll live up to that high bar. I'm with RBC and thrilled to be part of an organization that really values diversity and inclusion. And there's a number of programs that we do to support women's growth and development. And I'm personally passionate about this topic, so part of the reason I'm here is just the importance that focusing on women's advancement and development has been part of my career. I co-chair Diversity Council for one of our business units and have had a long history in being involved in this topic. So look forward to the conversation this morning.
Fantastic, thank you. And Cheryl, welcome.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Stargratt. I'm with Tangerine, and I'm the Chief People Officer at Tangerine. For those of you that might not know Tangerine, we're a direct bank that provides simplified banking every day to Canadians. I'm thrilled to be here today as well. From a personal perspective, I'm hoping to share the day with my 16-year-old daughter, who I brought just so that I can show her the power of women coming together. And from a professional perspective, and on behalf of our organization, it was really important for me because I think we need to be a part of the conversation and make sure that we're doing everything to empower women, both inside our organization as well as outside of our organization. So really, really privileged to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
And hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Iarocci from TD Bank Group. Oh, wow. I have a great audience. I have a fan club. Thanks for that. Like my colleagues, the number one reason I'm here is I'm so passionate about this topic. I think we have made a ton of progress as women, but there is still lots of work to do. And having dialogues like these ones are key to moving forward. And TD Bank Group, my employer, proudly supports having that kind of conversation.
And Shelley.
Hi, I'm Shelley and I'm with Ceridian, HCM. We're a cloud-based technology organization in human capital management technology. I'm Vice President of Product Management, so I'm responsible for cloud solutions for small business and managed solutions. I'm here because it's not only great for all of us women in advancing our own careers, but it's also advancing women is great for business. When you look at some of the statistics on the profitability of organizations that have women in the C-suite being 15% more. So, and I hope in some small way that us being on this panel, that we will have made a difference for at least one of you today.
Brilliant. Now I want to open with a controversial question. So here we go. We've just broken some glass ceilings, finally, in North America. But why do we need this day at all? Isn't leadership leadership? Is it gender specific? Cheryl, maybe you could start for us. Why can't women just come to the regular art of leadership? Isn't that real progress? How is this conversation different?
Are you sure you want to start with me?
Yeah.
I agree. I think we've made progress, but I also don't think it's just about the glass ceiling. I think that women face an array of different challenges in the workplace that men do. And, you know, it's the labyrinth of our leadership journeys that are different. And there's complexities that we face. And a day like today allows us to share our stories, care about each other, and empower each other what really has to go on in order to move forward. And it's only a day like today that we can come together and do that. And I do agree, great leadership is great leadership. Doesn't matter what gender you are, but the truth of the matter is that there are gender differences between males, and females tend to be more transformational leaders and styles, and men are more transactional. So a day like today allows us to connect and share the things that we've had as successes, as well as share some of our failures, because we're in the trenches, and we've been in the trenches. So I think it really grounds it for us.
Thank you. Now, what we've just learned, is there another point of view? Anyone willing to share, Rebecca?
Well, sure, I do agree with what you're saying. I think that, you know, we talk about this in our diversity committee. The clear sign of success will be when we don't need the committee. So if we didn't have anyone show up for this event, we would know that maybe we've solved the problem. But clearly there's demand. I think that the issue, unfortunately, while we've made great progress, I read recently Oliver Wyman published a report that says it's going to take 30 years at the pace we're going to actually see 30% of women in the top spots. So, you know, many of us might not be around in the workplace in 30 years. So I think, you know, there's still a lot of work to do, and one of my beliefs is that we still have some traditional stereotypes of what leadership looks like, and it often, in men and women's minds, looks like a charismatic, confident, strong male, often white male. And that's a role model we see in many organizations as what leaders look like. And I think we have work to do on what are the leadership traits that one author who wrote a book called Why Are We Bad at Picking Good Leaders talks about leadership potential traits, and they're different than what we typically have in our mind of what a leader looks like. And it's things like integrity, empathy, emotional intelligence, passion, courage, vision, and I'm missing one, judgment. And I think if you think of those leadership potential traits, many of them are what women actually bring strengths in, and empathy and emotional intelligence and integrity are all things women actually skew higher on from research. So there's work for us to do.
We'll get there. Vanessa?
Well, I think it's pretty cool that on a day like this we can shut down the men's room. That was what impressed me most.
That was my morning text. Please tell me we converted all the men's rooms to ladies' rooms. So fair enough.
Yeah, I think in addition to what my colleagues have said here, you know, you look at, I think the Harvard Business Review had this article about leadership traits. And out of 7,000 leaders that were surveyed where they did a 360-degree review, 12 out of the 16 leadership traits, women were judged to have higher leadership skills. So, you know, while we have higher leadership skills amongst women, the conversation does need to change so that we are promoting more women because we have the skills for it.
Thank you. So some of the most popular recent books in the women in leadership space have titles like Lean In, Our Turn, The Confidence Code, The Happiness Project, Presence, and Daring Greatly. And so, Vanessa, maybe you could start for us. Why are these topics important? What's the trend here?
Sure, and I am an avid consumer of all those books, and I've noticed two big themes really emerging in that kind of literature. And the first is really empowerment, and this idea of really encouraging women to own their career, own their life, and take a more aggressive approach to doing so. Certainly, we've heard lots from Cheryl Sandberg on that topic. But the other topic that I think is really interesting that's emerging is the idea of finding happiness through your work and fulfillment. And that's becoming such an important conversation. Viewing work as an opportunity to make an impact in the world, drive a different style of parenting, and reach a kind of new level of fulfillment. I find that conversation that's emerging really interesting for women.
Excellent. Thank you, Cheryl. Thoughts on those books?
I agree with what you said. I think that, you know, these themes and these books are appealing and targeting to different women, and we're all facing different issues. I think that they're about empowerment and positivity, and I think it's really good that they're, you know, they're on the top shelf, and they're not just for women in leadership, to be quite frank, because I think everybody can learn from them. I think it's not just about our careers, but also our full lives and how we show up to be present and happy and all of those things. But even more importantly is that, you know, they need to talk to us as individuals, and what do we do about it? Because it's not just about reading about the behaviors, but then what do we do to action them when we get back into the day-to-day and the real lives that take place tomorrow?
And I think that's, you know, if I'm sitting in this audience, that's what I want to hear from you all today as well. Is so what's your story? How did that work for you? So, Shelley, maybe you could start for us. What are some of the biggest issues facing women in leadership positions today? What can organizations do to solve them? But even more importantly, what can the individuals in this room do to solve those issues?
Sure. I think the obvious glaring one is wages. I think that all of us can look at the salary scales and do job harmonization, ensure that you do the analytics to ensure that there are no biases there, because there could be some of the unconscious biases. I think that we are lacking in role models. You look at, you know, many organizations where there may be a shortage of female leaders. You know, how are we promoting and have a pipeline of female leaders into our ranks? And third, I think having various programs in place for women. Men can attend too, but for women. You know, at Ceridian, Lisa Bull, one of my colleagues who has been on this panel as well, started off a network for women and women in leadership programs and mentorship programs, all that are very great at sharing stories of other leaders and enabling us women to understand that we are different, we think differently, and it's okay to think differently.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the comment around biases, because I think one of the biggest challenges for us is still rooted in both conscious and unconscious bias. And we've done a lot of work at RBC around training unconscious bias. And some of us have debates about, well, some of it's actually conscious. You know, we all tend to hire like me, so you want to bring people onto your team that emulate some of the things that you have, and that, again, fosters, if men are in leadership positions, there may be more people that are like them being promoted. So I think awareness building around these biases is one. I also take a view that, having seen the slow progress that we've made over the years, I think that we are in a place, and this is a bit controversial, around the idea of targets. And I do think organizations need to be thinking about putting hard targets in and holding leaders accountable for getting us to more parity in senior leadership roles.
Cheryl.
Can I just jump in on this one as well? I think, you know, women in leadership has been a journey, but what we need to do isn't a mystery anymore. And, you know, for organizations, I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is that, you know, CEOs need to be running, walking, talking about diversity, right? And it can't just be about the logics and the economics of it. It has to be real and it has to be authentic. But they do need a supporting cast. And I think there's a role for HR, for senior leaders, from leadership down to the front line on engaging and being held accountable for gender diversity, because it is good for business. It's good for, you know, for the country. I think that the other thing is looking at the unconscious biases in the system and taking a real hard look at management practices and looking for where they're not transparent or they're not objective. And then I think also, you know, for succession planning as a process, is that when we're sitting there and talking about future roles and current roles, and there's no women's names on the list, somebody needs to ask why. And then someone needs to hold somebody accountable for that. And if we don't do those things, it's not going to change. I think as individuals, and this is, based, I think, on some of our experience, but certainly mine, is that it starts with having a career strategy as well. What is the destination that you want to go to? What are the skills and capabilities that you want to achieve? And then, looking at getting mentors, because we know that mentorship has a huge impact on women's lives and on high potential lives. And so it's some of those types of things that you really need to it has to come from within, and you got to grab hold of it.
Well, let's maybe do a quick study, just so we can really laser focus and target on the audience here today. How many of you are C-level? Raise your hand if you're C-level. I'm counting 3, less than 5-ish. Oh, there we go, a few more now. No. Okay, what about vice presidential level then? So not C-level, but vice presidential level. Raise your hands if you're vice presidential level. Looking up in the balcony too. Okay, director level and above. Okay, managers. Oh, we got a lot of managers. Okay, this is good. Supervisors, or did you include yourself as managers? How about individual contributors? Just a few. And what about entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurs out there. A few entrepreneurs. Okay, so there we go. So now we can even more focus our conversation to helping these women learn from your experiences as we go forward. And so, interesting, Dr. Peter Jensen. He is phenomenal. If you're not familiar with him, he coaches many of our Olympic teams, particularly men's and women's hockey teams. And he talks about coaching the men in the locker room. And when he talks to the men about someone who's not really pulling their weight, not really doing the best work that they can, every man in the locker room says, well, it's about time he talked to that guy across the hall from me because he needs to hear that message. When he says the exact same thing to a team of female hockey players, every one of them personalize that message. He's talking to me personally. He's telling me I need to pull my socks up. I need to do better. And so when we're looking at all of this, how do you get past your inner critic? Shelley, you've got a big smile on your face. Thoughts about that inner critic?
I have a huge inner critic, and I try not to let it get to me. I think women in general have a much larger inner critic and have a lot more self-doubt, at least for me. What I try to do is focus on my goals and focus on achieving what I want to achieve. And really, I have a lot of self-talk on when I start to self-doubt myself to get past that. The other thing is just surrounding yourself with colleagues, peers, those more senior than you, that can be your mentor so that you can run things by them. Build your own support network of fans so that they can help you sometimes get past some of that self-doubt.
Vanessa?
Yeah, it's a great question. I certainly have lots of conversations with my inner critic. It definitely is something that I notice my peers, bosses, junior people on my team tend to do. And I think that honest conversation is really important because if you can articulate what it is that your inner critic is saying to you, that's the first step in actually solving it. And I find my inner critic, what I hear most isn't necessarily related to work, but everything else in life. So, the commitment that you need to make to perform at a higher level in an organization does require a lot of self-sacrifice. So is that worth it? And having that open dialogue, not only with myself, but with those around me. Because it is a messy conversation. We have to be really honest about it. So
can we talk about your trip to Vancouver?
Sure, that's a great example.
So we were together in Vancouver,
yeah.
And how did that go down for you in your world?
Well, it's a great story. I think I've told the story about 10 times. So I'm really lucky. I have parents who are both retired and healthy, and they're my main babysitters. I have a great 8-year-old son, Marco, and they actually took 4 days off to visit my brother in Portland, and my husband and I realized we were both traveling at the same time, and we realized that last minute. And the only solution to get me to the Art of Leadership and my husband Vince to his business trip is actually had to get my son on the plane, bring him with me to BC. Vince had to take a stop on the way home, pick up Marco in BC, and then bring him home. So there you go. He had a day in Stanley Park, but 15 hours on a plane. And those are the things that we have to do, and I tell that story because, you know, I think if we make this executive persona very polished and perfect, we make it unattainable for women who are just entering that sphere and just starting to face those challenges.
And that also talks about other choices that we may have made or not, right?
Right.
So, Cheryl, you look like you're ready to share some ideas.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think, you know, it's a myth that women can't have it all. I think having it all is personally defined. And there are choices and trade-offs and flexibility that throughout my career I've had to make based on either my family's needs or my personal needs or, you know, that of my husband's career. And I think it's those personal choices that have to, you know, flow and web with what you want to do and at what point you are in your career at that time. So I think sometimes that inner critic is a bit of an unrealistic expectation. And I find that grounding back to what is my purpose in life from a career perspective, my family, and who I want to be as an individual helps me to kind of quieten that, I call gremlin, and, you know, go back to what is really what I'm all about.
So, I mean, Jessica was talking to us about, you know, defining your own success. And so what is that? Rebecca, what's your success? How have you defined success for you? What's your inner critic?
Well, I think with the inner critic, one comment I'd make is just, I think we need to learn a little bit more how men manage criticism or constructive feedback. We tend to overanalyze it and really beat ourselves up about it, and I think there's something to be said for saying, you know what, there's some external factors, and I've learned to do that, and actually in my relationship, my husband sometimes is more self-critical, and I'm the one saying, no, it's because of this, and so, you know, I think there's something to be said for moving past things that happen, because if we dwell on them, they actually can really stagnate progress. So I would just say, let's try to let some of that roll off and move forward. Because, you know, we heard from some of the speakers this morning, we're all facing major challenges and issues, and, you know, we think back to our ancestors and what they went through, it's nothing in comparison. So in the big scheme of life, some of these things are things we can move on from.
I mean, absolutely so true, right? I mean, what we've learned is that so much of the feedback that we receive or critique isn't so much about us. It's more about the person that's delivering it. I would love to have my performance reviews over and over again, those ones that 60% of them were about that person, not about me. It's like, well, I want my performance review over again. Let's renegotiate. And so, are women starting out in business today facing different challenges than maybe you faced when you entered in your career? Clearly, you're at a height of success right now. Do you think it's easier or more challenging now? Rebecca?
Well, it's a great question. I think certainly millennials have it much more challenging, just men and women, in terms of landing jobs, and, you know, there's a lot more competition, and you can see the stats that they're living at home more with families, just lack of employment opportunities, delaying getting married, and all of those things. So I think that poses a whole new set of challenges that I certainly didn't face in my generation. But you know what I'm encouraged by is the young women that work with our team really are bringing a new level of confidence to the table, and I'm seeing that as a spark of optimism. And I also think millennials are not, we talk about, you know, they're not going to stick around necessarily in one company for the rest of their career. And one of the things that we need to be thinking about is, you know, if they don't like what they see, and if they are working for organizations that don't have gender parity or things that they value, they're going to walk, and, you know, we risk losing talent. So I think they're actually going to come with a different set of expectations that's going to put pressure on organizations in a different way.
And that pressure is a good thing, I'm taking it.
I think it is.
Okay. Cheryl, thoughts?
Yeah, I think if I think back 15 or 20 years ago when I started out in my career, I remember reading, there was 3 books on women, and it wasn't even about women in leadership. One was How Men Think, which didn't really resonate.
Do we? Men think?
Swim with the Dolphins. Again, another one, right? But I think today we're still facing similar issues that we did 20 years ago. The wage gap still exists. It's gone up by 1.5% over 12 months. You know, by the show of hands here, men are promoted at a ratio of 2 to 1 to women. So those challenges still exist. But I think the conversation, and to your point, is that the millennials, that there's hope. And people like us are here sharing stories, and I think trying to pass on what we've done to be successful in our full lives. And I think that's a big difference today than what I would have experienced 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay. Vanessa, you've had some diversity in your background and your career as well. So what about for you? Do you think it's different for women today?
I do. I echo the comments of my colleagues, especially with regards to how hard it is to start out. So I graduated as a CA, and at the time, if you were willing to be an accountant, kind of anyone would give you a job. So it was easy to get a job at best accounting firm on the street, in my view, PwC, who's a sponsor. And when I left, I was recruiting, and I'd be recruiting these amazing women that had, 2 graduate degrees. They've built a school in Nepal. They were just so exceptionally accomplished. I was kind of embarrassed. So I do think there's that pressure kind of entering the career force. Something else I'm noticing, and I don't have enough of a purview to assess if this is something new or not, but the issue of ageism and when does a career end seems to be bubbling to the surface, because women do tend to take time off or slow down in their 30s, many women. So I think we need to start having a more honest conversation about, can a 40-ish mid-level manager still be viewed as high potential, or do you have to be like this bright, bustling, really young millennial with new ideas? I think that is getting tougher, especially in the larger organizations.
Mm-hmm. All right, Shelley.
I think I've determined I'm the oldest person on stage. But when I started in my career, I worked for BMO, Bank of Montreal, great organization, had a great career there. But in the 80s, the Employment Equity Act was passed, okay, where the intent of it was to ensure equity and fairness to women, Aboriginals, visible minorities, and persons with disability. And while you can debate the success of that, it was a statement. It was a statement about equity and fairness. I wish I had the resources back then that are available now. The internet wasn't as predominant, where there are lots of resources. The types of books that are available now, Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In and all of the other wonderful books that have been written. I wish that wisdom that was there, the role models that are now more prevalent, were available at that time. And so I learned through, I think, just experience on how to overcome some of the challenges, where I was on a high-profile project. I was a junior individual on a high-profile project where we were implementing client server into the retail branches. And so I was pretty shy, didn't speak up. And Sheryl Sandberg would say, I didn't lean in. I didn't sit at the table. I didn't lean in. But it was to the point where one of the senior leaders said to me, maybe you shouldn't be on the team. My manager at the time was backed me up, was my advocate, and proceeded to then coach me, and coached me to this effect, and said, you have a right to be at the table. You have a right to be heard. I believe in you, and speak up. So he gave me the nudge that I needed in order to speak up, to have the confidence in myself to say that I had a right to be at the table. And so, through that experience, I look back on that particular coaching moment, and I reflect on it when I have my self-doubts, when I'm not leaning in, to do that. So.
Wow. It kind of, the confidence versus the right to be at the table rung for me. That hit a core for me. It's interesting self-reflection and self-talk. And so also the discussion of the mentor helping out. So when it comes to leaders, some people are saying that we're really just all free agents. Does that absolve the organization from making serious investments in people? Historically, people stuck with one company. My dad retired from one organization. But now, they're saying millennials are definitely going to be working for 5 different companies before they're 30. So does that change your approach to mentorship or sponsorship? Rebecca?
Well, I don't think you can go wrong as an organization to continue to look at ways to invest in your people and giving employees the best experience possible, particularly your high potential talent. And I think what it does in this new era is put more onus on us to identify those high potential talents earlier, because you know that if you don't meet their needs in an organization, they will be moving on. And an example I can give is part of my team is focused on digital, and we have digital programmers and some really great talent on development and design skills, and those are coveted, highly sought after, competitive skills that we need to think about. How do we attract? Why would a developer out of school come to RBC versus going to Google or a startup? What compelling offer can we give those people? And one of the things that we do is look at how do we make sure that that team can operate autonomously and take some of the best practices that are happening in startups and have them applied in a large organization like ours, and giving, understanding what drives your high potential talent and leaning into those things so that you're focusing on experience for them that's meaningful to them and may make them want to stay longer than a couple of years.
And what about though if I am now in my 30s and I do want to be seen as a high potential? How do I go from having done what I've done and made the choices that I've made, and now all of a sudden, hey, no, I'm ready. I want to put my hand up. I'm high potential, but not be seen as now being pushy? Or what guidance would you give me? I wish I was in my 30s, by the way, but at any rate, you get the question.
I think we all have to be really putting ourselves out there, and sometimes it's not comfortable for women to state what their ambitions are. And I think we need to put it on the table with your leaders. I also think there was a comment this morning by Dr. Heidi that talked about hard work doesn't necessarily get you noticed. I would just add to that I believe hard work gets you noticed if you're doing work that's actually aligned to key business objectives. So if you are doing some great work, you will stand out if it's on things that are meaningful to the organization. So I would say, find those projects, put your hand up, don't be shy, and make sure that you're getting involved in some high-profile things. That you'll get your natural mentors and sponsors out of that, and that certainly is what I can speak to in my career, that through doing great work and working on things that I knew were adding value to the business objectives, you just earn the right to get sponsors that would put their neck out for you.
Cheryl, you're Chief Human Resources Officer, so.
Yeah, I think it would be a closed mindset if organizations think, well, we don't want to invest or people are going to move around. I think you have to have an open mindset in that what's attractive to people is they want to develop, they want to grow, so giving people those opportunities. And if people are leaving the organization to go elsewhere, then you're not doing something that's grabbing their heart and their minds. And that's really, I think, what organization needs to look at. And when it comes to high performance and high potential, I don't think that there's any substitute for hard work for any gender. But I do think there are things that we can do, like you said, is taking special assignments, putting our hands up for things that are going to add to the collection of who we are and what we want to achieve in our careers. But I really honestly think that by putting people out that you've trained and potentials that go elsewhere, that it'll pay itself forward and those people will come back. Because I know I have relationships with people from 12 years ago that work with me now that I worked with them then. So I think you really have to keep that open mindset when it comes to development.
Excellent. Additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think the whole concept of personal branding also becomes really important in an economy like this one. So helping women to really establish what their brand is, making sure that they are amassing and accumulating a very marketable skill set and helping them understand that that's really important in today's economy. You can do some great things, but unless they weave together to tell a story about you and why you are uniquely suited to make a difference, it can get a little tough. So that's the one piece of advice I'd have for sure. What's your kind of one-liner?
I would just say on that as well is I know I'm in HR and I've been in HR for most of my career, but I think it was about the 5-year mark I had a mentor come and say, you need to do something that differentiates you from others. And I said, well, what is that? And they said, you need to go into Six Sigma. And my jaw dropped, because anyone that knows me, I am not a process-driven person, nor am I analytical. And I took it. And it was the scariest thing I did in my career because I almost failed, but it stretched me and it differentiated me in different ways. And I think it made me better for who I became as an HR person later on in life because I can see different perspectives and it gave me a skill I didn't have. But again, without that nudge from that mentor and really, really scaring the heck out of me, I'm not sure that it would, I'd be here today talking as the head of HR.
Wow. So those turnaround moments, right? And I'm just going back to Dr. Heidi Grant Halverson's discussions around, the math test and being scored in the first few questions, and I'm really trying to connect that to where we are in our careers and then revitalizing to move us further and farther. So studies have indicated that we'll all be self-employed or entrepreneurs at some point. Do female entrepreneurs face the same challenges as women in large organizations? And what can entrepreneurs learn from women in large organizations, and or vice versa?
Yeah, sure. I think that there are many similar challenges for entrepreneurs versus women in a larger organization. However, I think that what female entrepreneurs may be lacking is really the availability of the network of women that's hopefully readily available within a larger organization, and to have those role models. So entrepreneurs have to seek that out more themselves, attend conferences like this. There's so many more resources that are available, not only in books, but through the internet, that you can join forums and networks to help you.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship is a terrific avenue in so many ways for women, because what it does is it takes away some of the structural barriers to progression, some of the power structures that really play into that unconscious bias. But I personally think one of the toughest things about being a female entrepreneur is really the kind of collision of your biological clock and the growth trajectory. So there is no maternity leave on, when you run your own business. And how do you manage that? So I think being aware of those potholes is really important, because all the female entrepreneurs I know learn that having a partner in their business, having that number two, so that they could manage those tumultuous years when they were having children and the children were young, that's definitely key.
Excellent. Thoughts? So it's about time we come to you. Lunch for us is at 12:15, so we've got 15 minutes to find out what they'd like to know from you. And so I'm going to grab a microphone and head into the audience here and see what you have to say. Where's the first question? Right in the center. Perfect. Keep your hand up for me if you could. Where are you at? There we are. This is going to come down the lane for you. Here it comes. Pass it along. Good stuff. Get it down.
Thanks so much. Hi there. Thanks so much for being on the panel. I have to read this because I wrote it from the beginning when you first started talking. Do you think that women are looking for happiness through all these new strategies and books and mindfulness and other practices because we're not getting promoted? So it's how can we be happy with the way things are? I know, a little provocative maybe?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I do think that there is an increased focus on finding happiness through your work. I think there's a few things driving that. I think one of them actually is what you allude to. So can you find happiness in your role if you're not moving forward as you expected? And how do you address that collision? I think that's a reality. I also think that many, many women that I talk to are still very conflicted about the fact that they do often prioritize work over some of the more traditional, the traditional activities that women were derived happiness from. So kind of exploring that there are multiple ways to become happy. It just seems to be in conversation of late so often. So it's a great question.
Yeah. To be honest, I've been looking for happiness my whole life when I wasn't promoted and when I have been promoted. So it's been a bit elusive for me. But, I think it's how you define happiness, and it is a blend of work and personal and family. And that's really the happiness, at least for myself, that, you know, I'm trying to seek, and being very realistic of the trade-offs that I have to make, but not trying to be judgmental to myself or others that might have a different kind of view of happiness and what they're achieving. So I really think it's a personal choice. I personally don't think it's because, you know, I haven't been promoted or I have been promoted, but it's understanding how to blend that completeness of myself together, and that's how I would define happiness.
Yeah, I think that happiness is really your own definition of happiness. But I think the conversation, or when you talk about happiness and mindfulness, is more about what is in 2016, right? Where there is a desire across men and women to have probably more balance in their lives. And how do you balance, you know, work and life? And really, they're kind of melding together. And so how do you, you know, how do you balance? It's not just a women's issue. I think it's for all of us.
That was the point I was going to make, Shelley, that I actually think it isn't necessarily your hypothesis, but it's an interesting one to think about. But I think men and women right now are facing the same dilemma about how do they find that balance and integration of their work and life. So I would echo the comments the panel's made.
Great, thanks so much. I do have one more question, and it's about the millennials. So they want to jump around, experience different things. I'm wondering if us focusing on the fact that they're leaving because they're not engaged versus leaving to get varied experiences so that when they are older, they bring more to the table. What do you think about that?
I would guess on this. This isn't fact-based, but their path to success and their timeline is more accelerated. Just from what I've seen, there's an expectation that things will happen quicker than in the generation I grew up, where, you know, and I talk to many male colleagues who will say, well, I did that for 20 years before I got that promotion. And, you know, I think millennials are coming in with a set of expectations that things would move quicker. So I believe the main motivation is that there's opportunities to progress more quickly and probably have more variety and always learning by jumping and having different opportunities and experiences at different companies. But I do think organizations can look at that and say, how can we keep those talented individuals engaged and give them what they're looking for? Maybe it's not a promotion, but it's an opportunity to get involved in some other exciting high-profile initiatives. And I think that's the challenge for us as organizations to look at.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is an expectation of more immediacy, if you will. But I think that organizations can, I mean, one of the largest challenges we have as leaders is to attract, hire, motivate, and retain employees and talent, irrespective of the generation. I think with millennials, it's about providing them with experiences so they do stay. If they're very talented. And I think ways that we can do that is through programs like job rotations and things like that, where they will get the experience that they have and hopefully stay longer.
And I think if you look at what attracts, you know, that segment of the population in particular, and what the research shows, is that organizations that have a higher purpose, and it goes to the comment around happiness too. You know, the big attraction for that generation is, does this organization contribute larger to the communities we're in? Do they participate in those types of initiatives? And then it's about how you are giving the experiences, and there is some expediency that they're looking for, but how are you developing and growing them as a whole person, and not just through sometimes the hierarchical ladder.
Okay, thank you for being here to share your experiences. I'm curious on what are the one or two things in your career that made the pivotal moment for your career, and how did you make that choice? Thank you.
The pivotal moment for me is when I made a decision to leave an organization, and I went to an organization. It was a colossal failure. It was a real, you know, choice that I thought I was being mindful about. And when I got there, the values of the organization and the leadership didn't align to my values. And it was a real moment of reflection for me, and it was painful, and it lasted a couple of years. And throughout all of my choices now, when I look at where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do, what kind of, teammates am I going to have, I remember that experience because it brings me back to where and when I was happy and what's most important to me in my career. So to be honest, it was the one that really I would consider that I failed at. That was the biggest moment for me.
And I was going to say a similar thing, but a little bit different outcome. For me, pivotal moments have been when I've taken leaps of faith and taken a risk. And I don't think women are comfortable taking risks in general. But when I took a risk to come to RBC, I left a large team managing, and I went to an individual contributing role. And I took a bit of a leap of faith with some expectations of what might come out of that. And I've never looked back. It's been an incredible move for me. So I think, on one hand, you take a risk and it might not be what you expected, but on the other, I think I don't think you should shy away from taking risks in your career because they can actually be very pivotal in where it lands.
And I don't think you let the risk keep you down either, right? Like when you do fail, it's about bouncing back. It's about having that grit and that perseverance to say, brush yourself off, get back in the game, and there's still a journey to be had.
Yeah, for me, I think a couple of experiences. You always learn from your failures, and that's how you grow. And similar to Cheryl, I joined an organization that ended up not being aligned to my values, and had a manager that, frankly, I wasn't looking. I wasn't looking for a manager that had the same values and would coach me, et cetera. From that point on, when I left that organization, I chose to leave that organization, I've really looked for, it's not just about joining the company, it's about joining that manager. And so picking a manager that's fabulous for you. I think the other one is about a mentor that I had who said, look beyond your job grade. Always look beyond and what you're currently doing and take a broader look, because from there, if you go 10,000 feet, you'll be able to make recommendations on things that perhaps your leaders are also looking at, and to be able to take the risk and be brave to be able to make those recommendations. And that has helped me, even though I have the self-doubt as well.
So we're going to take a question from here at center, and then I'm going to come over to the right side of the house.
Thank you. I've spent 20 years in the corporate world and then started my own company 7 years ago. But the question I have for you is about how we engage young men and boys in this discussion. I have 2 teenage boys, and we've been having some interesting discussions around the dinner table lately. So what are your organizations, or what are you doing personally that engages men in this conversation about raising women up as opposed to pulling men down?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question, because the reality is, if you look at the numbers, I think only 14% of CEOs in this country are women. So men are still making the majority of the decisions that we need them to make. And I think actually formalizing processes where you get men involved in the conversation. So at TD, for example, one of our most challenged businesses has a man leading the Women in Leadership initiative. And the reason for that is so he can really be a role model to other men to communicate the benefits of having women in leadership in a way that resonates with men. Because the reality is we almost have to flip our target audience a little bit in this discussion, because we have to make this discussion resonate with men. And a great way to do that is actually to get men to lead the conversation, which seems a little counterintuitive, but it's been very effective at TD.
We've had this conversation as well internally, and I think one of the things that we feel is important is the engagement, but also awareness. I think there's actually a lack of awareness of some of the statistics and some of the issues. And if you dissect organizations, and you would have a purview on this in an HR function of where there's stagnation and drop-off rates of where women stop seeing as much advancement as men. They're typically, and I know that in this group there was a lot of, at the manager level, it's actually getting into that sort of director level that you'll see a drop-off rate. And I think so there's an important role to play to educate men, to bring them in the conversations, to have, focused efforts around diversity that include men and women at the table. And I've had conversations with very senior leaders that are actually shocked at some of the statistics, and they were not aware at all that things like, what was happening around unconscious bias, and they never thought they had that, but it's a bit of this eye-opening dialogue that can happen with men at the table. And there may be a period of time that we need to actually reset, and I think that's going to be challenging to manage through because it may make men feel disadvantaged, and that's not at all what it's about, but I think it's getting us to parity, and unfortunately, women have been for years and years disadvantaged in the numbers game. So it's going to be a challenging future if we tackle this head on.
I think it does start with awareness, and I think it also goes to how do you build the knowledge and the ability to do something about it. But the desire comes from, I think, a conversation that doesn't pit the genders against each other, too. And I think, sometimes the language of the conversation can be divisive versus more inclusive, and it's a we and an us. And I think in bringing men into the game and having the conversation around talent and highlighting some of the truths about it, but then having a partnership in how we're moving forward so that it's not, because it is not just a women's issue. Gender diversity is good for organizations. It's good for the gender as well. And I think until we have that broader conversation, it's just not going to happen. And I don't think it's going to happen overnight. But if you look at countries that have made progress on this, that's how the approach goes.
Hi, it sounds like you kind of started to answer my question, and when she asked it, I was like, so I'm just going to kind of edit it a little bit. Working in sort of a male-dominated industry and trying to promote gender diversity and have our corporate bodies see value in diversity, I find that there tends to be a bit of a toss-up between what's more important in helping develop female leaders, whether it be community involvement, being a mentor or having a mentee, or leadership development. So in your eyes, choosing between those two, if you had to lead with trying to promote gender diversity and having your company see value in that, do you think it's more effective to lead with the leader development portion to develop the current females in the male-dominated society, or perhaps turn around and maybe attribute some energy to community involvement and maybe going out to the community and having them seek empowerment externally?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I do think it's really important for organizations to develop their female leaders. I think there's a whole ecosystem at play. Women clients, women in the community, and women within the actual organization. And I think when you have strong, empowered women within the organization, those other two things will happen, and those things will be better for the organization. But the linchpin, if you will, is having strong, capable women in my humble view.
Yeah. If I only had so many, chips to play, I would play them on mentorship, to be honest, in an organization. I think, though, it goes back to the culture and values of organizations and whether or not at the top they value diversity and gender diversity. But mentorship, there's a proven track record that it does help women get ahead. It furthers, we talk about our past, we share our stories, and I think that's, that would be the prominent thing that I would focus on.
I would just add that building fact base if you're in a position where you're trying to compel why it's important. In our organization, if I look at wealth management, there's stats that suggest that 70% of wealth and assets will be controlled by women in the next 5 years. It's a hugely important market for us, and if we don't look at how we're going to serve that base and have a workforce that reflects the audience we're serving, we're going to be at a huge disadvantage. So I think if you can look at facts that can help support why this is important for the company, even if it's heavily male-led today, why the future things need to evolve, I think that's a very important point to drive home.
And Rebecca, that's just tying me right back into Caddy K and the confidence code. So what can we do? So my final question for each of you quickly is, so what are you excited about? We're leaving here today. What are you excited about? Rebecca, start it off for us.
Sure. Well, I'm excited. In the last 24 months, I would say there's been a huge momentum in the media, in dialogues like this that's happening, and I think it is raising awareness. I hope it's not driving fatigue, but I think that, you know, there's a movement underway, and I think there is momentum that's going to make a change. So I'm very excited and encourage this audience to continue the dialogue and help get us to a parity place.
Beautiful. Cheryl?
I would echo it. I'm very encouraged because, you know, the empowerment of women and what we see in the audience today and the future that's ahead of us is very exciting for us.
I'm actually really excited about some of the shifts that are occurring in the economy. The kind of disruption that's happening means that skills like creativity, innovation, lateral thinking, multitasking, those are really rising to the top. And we have scientific proof that women are actually better at those things than men. That's uncomfortable to say, right? So I think that is a really interesting shift that is kind of going to put some jet fuel behind this wave of feminism.
Shelley?
Yeah, I'm excited about all of the programs that I'm seeing in various organizations that raise the conversation beyond just numbers, but also what can we do? What can we own up to do to increase our skills to advance in leadership?
Wow. There you have it, folks, from some people that are doing it now. Shelley, Vanessa, Cheryl, Rebecca, thank you so much. We appreciate your support here today.